What would a millionaire discover if he secretly followed his cleaning woman to an abandoned house on the edge of town? The truth that her own children would reveal to him would change his life forever. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 35th floor of the tallest corporate tower in downtown Chicago. Richard Valmont stood at his desk, hands trembling, gripping a financial audit report that had just turned his world upside down. The numbers did not lie. Someone had been stealing from his company, and all suspicion pointed directly at the custodial department. "Impossible," he muttered, his eyes scanning every line of the document again and again. For years he had placed complete trust in his cleaning staff, and most of all, he had trusted Esperanza, that quiet, hard-working woman who always stayed late, long after every other employee had gone home, working in the same hours Richard himself sometimes burned the midnight oil. But the facts were undeniable. High-end cleaning supplies were missing, specialized industrial disinfectants, products that only the overnight custodial crew had access to. The private investigator Richard had hired weeks earlier had just delivered his preliminary report. Security camera footage showed suspicious movement, shadowy figures hauling boxes out of the building after hours. Richard felt as though someone had reached into his chest and torn something out. How was it possible that the one employee he trusted most, the woman who knew every corner of his private office, could betray him like this? That night, as Esperanza finished her cleaning rounds, Richard stayed hidden in his darkened office. Through the narrow crack of the door, he watched every move she made. Her motions were exactly as he remembered, careful, methodical, almost reverential toward every object she touched. Then something happened that made his blood run cold. Esperanza walked to the supply closet and used a key she absolutely should not have had. Richard watched as she removed several industrial cleaning products, specialized disinfectants, and other expensive items, which she quietly tucked into a large duffel bag. His heart shattered. "I cannot believe this," he whispered to himself, feeling the burn of betrayal rise in his chest like fire. For years, he had been generous with his employees, fair wages, holiday bonuses, extra paid time off. So why would Esperanza do something like this? Why would she risk everything for a bag of cleaning supplies? When Esperanza finished and headed toward the elevator, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He would not call the police. He would not confront her. Not yet. He needed to understand why. He needed to know what had pushed this woman toward becoming someone he no longer recognized. Silently, Richard followed Esperanza to the parking garage. From his black BMW, he kept a careful distance as the old city bus pulled away into the rain-soaked Chicago streets. His heart pounded with a strange mixture of anger and heartbreak he had never felt before. This woman had violated his trust in the cruelest possible way. The bus made several stops before Esperanza stepped off in a neighborhood Richard had never visited before. It was the kind of place where the streets had no sidewalks, where the houses looked assembled from different scraps of material, where poverty hung in the air like a heavy fog that never lifted. Richard followed on foot after parking, keeping to the shadows, his designer shoes stepping over cracked pavement and broken bottles. His BMW had looked painfully out of place back there. Esperanza walked for nearly 20 minutes, carrying that duffel bag. Richard stayed close enough to watch, his anger building with every step. What could she possibly need with that much disinfectant? Was she running some kind of side operation, selling cleaning products out of the back of a van? The thought made his stomach turn. Then Esperanza stopped, and Richard lost his words entirely. It was not a house. It was a structure that looked one strong wind away from collapsing. Cracked walls, broken windows covered with flattened cardboard boxes, a roof that had clearly surrendered to the weather years ago. And yet, Esperanza walked toward the front door as though it were her home. "What is this place?" Richard whispered to himself, his anger beginning to dissolve, replaced by something softer and far more unsettling. This did not look like the hideout of a professional thief. It looked like the refuge of someone desperate. Esperanza disappeared inside. Richard waited a few minutes before creeping closer. The boarded windows let no light through, but sounds drifted out into the night. Sounds that stopped him cold. Children's voices. "Mama, you're home!" A small, joyful voice floated through the darkness. "Diego was coughing all night, and Sophia has a really bad fever." Richard felt the air leave his lungs. Children. Esperanza had children, living here, in this place. His mind began to process a reality he had never once considered. The cleaning products, the disinfectants. What if she was not stealing to sell them? He moved closer to a window where a small tear in the cardboard gave him a narrow view inside. What he saw through that opening changed everything he thought he knew about Esperanza Morales. Inside that abandoned house, lit only by a cluster of candles, were 3 children. A teenage boy watching over 2 younger ones. One of the younger children was clearly very sick. Esperanza had pulled the cleaning supplies from her bag and was now meticulously disinfecting every surface, every corner of that crumbling, precarious shelter. Her movements were the same ones Richard had watched for 3 years in his downtown office. Careful, deliberate, filled with a love he now understood completely. "Come here, baby," he heard Esperanza say to the smallest child. "We need to get that cough taken care of. I cannot lose you, too." Richard stumbled backward, tears rising without warning to his eyes. "Two? What did that word mean?" His chest cracked open as he realized how completely and unfairly he had judged this woman. She was not stealing out of greed or selfishness. She was stealing to survive, to keep her children alive, in conditions no human being should ever face. Then, a child's voice cut through the night, quiet and trembling, like a blade through still water. "Mama? Is Daddy ever coming back from heaven? Is he going to come help us the way he promised, before he left?" The silence that followed was more devastating than any scream. In that moment, Richard understood. This woman was not only fighting poverty, she was fighting grief. And while he had spent weeks calculating the replacement cost of industrial disinfectant, this family had been fighting an epic battle just to stay alive. Richard stood motionless for several long minutes. His legs felt unsteady as he stepped back from the window. His mind was struggling to catch up to a devastating truth he had been completely blind to. He walked back to his BMW, but could not start the engine. His hands were shaking too badly to hold the key. The little boy's words kept echoing in his head like a wound that would not close. Is Daddy ever coming back from heaven? He sat there staring at that crumbling house where a single mother was fighting to keep 3 children alive. Through the gaps in the walls, he could see the gentle flicker of candlelight, dancing shadows that seemed to tell a story of unbreakable love. "My God," he murmured, pressing both hands over his face. "What have I done?" For weeks he had been preparing to fire Esperanza. He had seriously considered pressing theft charges. He had allowed suspicion to poison every thought he had about her. And all this time, she had been using those products to create the cleanest, safest environment she possibly could for her sick children. He thought back to every late evening he had seen Esperanza still working long after everyone else had left. He had always found it admirable. Now he understood it completely. Every extra minute meant extra money. Every extra dollar meant another resource to carry home to her family. Then new sounds from inside the house jolted him back to attention. A crisis was unfolding. Richard got out of the car quietly and moved back to the window. "Mama, Diego cannot breathe right." A small girl's voice trembled with panic. "He's turning blue and making these weird sounds when he tries to breathe." Richard watched through the opening as Esperanza moved frantically through the room, scooping up the smallest child while trying to calm him with her voice. "Matthias, bring the steamer we made with the pot," she commanded, her voice shaking but firm. "Sophia, help me hold your brother's head while we do the steam treatment. We are going to get through this, my love. Mama is not going to let anything happen to you." Richard watched in painful silence as that family improvised medical care from almost nothing. Matthias, the oldest, moved a pot of boiling water near the little boy, creating a makeshift steam vaporizer while his sister gently cradled her brother's head. The coordination between them spoke of a routine born from necessity. Children who had learned to care for each other through circumstances no child should ever face. "Mama, why does Diego keep getting sick?" Sophia asked with that brutal honesty only children possess. "Is it because we live here? Is it because we don't have heat like my friends at school have?" The silence that followed was more telling than any answer. Richard watched as Esperanza fought to hold back tears, continuing the steam treatment with shaking hands. The little girl's question had named a truth the whole family already knew, but that no one had been strong enough to say out loud. "Sweetheart," Esperanza finally answered, her voice on the edge of breaking. "Sometimes life gives us really hard tests. But what matters is that we have each other. And Mama is going to do everything she possibly can to make things better for you. Daddy is watching over us from heaven, and he wants us to be strong." Richard felt tears slide down his face. The strength of this woman, her ability to hold on to hope in circumstances that would have shattered most people. It moved him in a way he had never been moved before. His entire life he had been surrounded by luxury, convenience, and instant solutions. He had never once been forced to choose between buying medicine for a sick child or paying rent on a home barely fit for living. "Mama," said Matthias then, with a maturity that was heartbreaking in a boy his age, "tomorrow I'm not going to school. I'll stay here with Diego and Sophia while you work. And I heard the loading dock at the distribution center on Central is looking for helpers. I can earn some extra money." "No, baby," Esperanza responded firmly, though her voice was trembling with emotion. "Your education is the most important thing you have. It is the only path to a different life than mine. I will not let you sacrifice your future because of where we are right now." "But Mama, we need the money," Matthias pressed on. "And if Diego gets worse, someone needs to be here to take him to the public hospital." "You cannot miss work. We need that paycheck." Richard realized he was witnessing a conversation that repeated itself in this family constantly. The terrible tension between immediate survival and future hope. Every single day, Esperanza had to choose between staying with her sick children or keeping the job that kept them all alive. And her children, barely old enough to have real responsibilities, were already shouldering burdens meant for adults. "Listen to me," said Esperanza, drawing all three children into a tight group hug that Richard could see clearly through the broken window. "I know things are really hard right now, I know you're cold. I know Diego keeps getting sick. I know there isn't always enough food, but I promise you, this is going to change. Mama is working so hard to find us a better place. For real, Mama? Sophia asked, eyes wide with that fragile, luminous hope only children can carry. Are we going to have a house with heat, and Diego will be able to breathe better? Yes, my love, Esperanza answered. Richard could hear the uncertainty hiding beneath the certainty of her voice. We are going to have a real home, with bedrooms for each of you, with hot water, with everything you deserve. Richard's chest ached as he understood that Esperanza was making promises she might never be able to keep. On a custodian's salary, even with overtime, pulling this family out of that abandoned house seemed nearly impossible. And yet, she kept feeding her children hope, because it was the only thing keeping them together. Then he heard something that reframed the entire night. "Matthias," Esperanza said in a low voice, believing the younger children were asleep. "I need you to know something. The job at Mr. Valmont's company, lately I've had to take some things from the office. Cleaning supplies, disinfectants. I know it's wrong. But with Diego so sick and no money for medication..." "Mama, you don't have to explain yourself to me," Matthias interrupted with a wisdom far beyond his years. "You always do the right thing. If you took those things, it was because you had no other choice. Dad always said that when it comes to protecting family, you do what you have to do." Richard stopped breathing. Esperanza was confessing to her teenage son that she had been taking things from the office. But the way she said it was not the voice of a criminal rationalizing a crime. It was the voice of a desperate mother explaining to her son why she had compromised her own moral values in order to keep her children alive. "But, baby," Esperanza continued, tears falling now, "I need you to understand that this is not what I want to teach you. Under normal circumstances, I would never take something that isn't mine. Your father was an honest man, a hard-working man. He wanted you kids to grow up to be people of integrity. What I'm doing right now is only until we find another way." "Mom and Dad would do exactly the same thing if he were here," Matthias said, wrapping both arms around his mother. "He taught us that the most important thing is to protect your family. That's exactly what you're doing." Richard had to press his hand against the wall to keep himself from sinking to the ground. This woman had been tormented by guilt. She had been actively teaching her children that what she was doing was wrong, while simultaneously doing it to survive. These were not the actions of a thief. These were the actions of a human being pushed to an impossible edge. Then Diego began to cough violently. A deep, wet, frightening sound that set the entire family in motion instantly. Richard watched Esperanza scoop up the little boy, while Matthias and Sophia scrambled for the pot of hot water. "Diego, baby, easy," Esperanza murmured, rocking him gently. "Mama is right here. Breathe slow, just like I showed you." But it was getting worse. Even from where Richard stood, he could see the bluish tint around the little boy's lips. His breathing was becoming more labored with every passing second. The child needed emergency medical care right now. "Mama," Matthias said, his voice rising with controlled panic. "I think we need to take him to the hospital. He's getting worse." "Baby, you know we don't have money for an emergency room," Esperanza replied, with desperation cracking through her voice. "And the county hospital is going to take forever. Plus they're going to ask all kinds of questions about where we live, about our situation." Richard understood immediately. Esperanza was afraid to seek help, not just because of money. She was afraid that if the authorities discovered the conditions her children were living in, they might take them away from her. "Mama, I don't care what they ask," Matthias said firmly. "If Diego gets worse because we didn't take him, I will never forgive myself, and you won't either." Those words hit Richard like a punch to the throat. A 12-year-old boy was staring down the real possibility of losing his little brother because they couldn't afford an ER visit. Esperanza made the decision that only a mother who has completely run out of options can make. "You're right, baby," she said, wrapping Diego tightly in a worn blanket. "We're going to the hospital. I don't care what comes after. The only thing that matters right now is keeping your brother safe." Richard watched them leave the abandoned house in the middle of the night. A small, silent procession wrapped in worn blankets, moving through the rain toward a distant bus stop. Esperanza carried Diego. Matthias held Sophia's hand, and all of them walked with the quiet urgency of people who know that every minute counts. That was the moment Richard Valmont made the most important decision of his life. He could not stay there in the shadows. He could not drive back to his lakeside mansion, knowing that 3 children and their mother were navigating a medical crisis with nothing but each other and the light of a few candles behind them. He ran to his BMW and started the engine. He had to do something. He had to help. But as he drove following the bus toward the hospital, one question gnawed at him relentlessly. How had he lived 45 years without once realizing that this level of suffering existed just a few miles from where he slept every night? And more than that, what kind of man had he become if he had been capable of judging a desperate mother without ever trying to understand her story? Cook County General Hospital felt like a maze of lost hope under its flickering fluorescent lights. Richard arrived just minutes behind Esperanza, parking his BMW at the curb where it looked as out of place as a black-tied gown at a county fair. From the entrance, he could see Esperanza rushing toward the ER check-in counter with Diego in her arms, Matthias and Sophia close behind. The little boy had deteriorated during the bus ride. His breathing was audible and strained. Even from the doorway, Richard could see the struggle in his small chest. "Please, my son cannot breathe." Esperanza's voice cut across the waiting room as she reached the triage desk. The nurse on duty, whose badge read Carmen Ruiz, looked at Diego with a practiced eye. "Ma'am, I can see your son does need attention," Carmen said, "but I need you to fill out these forms first. Personal information, address, insurance information, payment method." "Forms?" Esperanza's voice broke. "My son is turning blue and you want me to fill out forms? Please just help him first. We'll do all the paperwork you need after." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but these are mandatory procedures," the nurse replied with the institutional detachment that comes from working too many double shifts in an underfunded system. "Without complete documentation, we cannot process his intake." Richard stood back near the wall, watching his jaw tightening with every passing second. He was watching bureaucracy become a life-threatening obstacle for someone without the resources to push past it. "Mama, just give her what she needs," Matthias whispered, stepping up beside his mother. "I'll stay with Sophia. You fill it out." But when Esperanza reached the address line, her pen froze. What was she supposed to write? Abandoned building, no street number, South Side. That would raise immediate questions about her fitness as a mother. Questions that could end in something far worse than a hospital bill. "Ma'am, I need a valid address," Carmen pressed. The line behind Esperanza was growing. "We're in the middle of a move," Esperanza said, her hands trembling visibly. "Temporarily staying with family. I can get you the address." And then Diego convulsed. His small body seized in his mother's arms, and the entire ER froze for one terrible second before the room erupted into motion. "Code blue in triage," Carmen called out, already moving from behind the desk and reaching for Diego. "I need a physician at triage, now." "Don't take my baby," Esperanza sobbed, trying to follow as a team of nurses wheeled Diego toward the treatment area. "Please let me go with him. He's scared. He doesn't know these people." A security guard gently but firmly blocked her path. "Ma'am, family members cannot enter the treatment area during a medical emergency." You need to wait here." Richard watched Esperanza collapse. This woman who had battled poverty, widowhood, and single motherhood with iron composure finally broke. She folded into one of the hard plastic waiting room chairs and wept with a raw, bottomless grief that silenced everyone around her. "Mama, don't cry." Sophia climbed into her mother's lap and pressed her small palms against her mother's cheeks. "Diego is so strong. Remember what Daddy always said? Our family has warrior blood. Diego is going to be okay because he has your strength inside him." Those words from an 8-year-old girl revealed something essential about who this family was. They had lost their anchor, but his strength, his voice, his love still moved through every one of them. "Matthias," Esperanza said quietly, gathering herself enough to speak. "How did Daddy die? I've never told you the whole story." Richard moved a step closer. He needed to hear this. Esperanza drew a slow breath. "Your daddy was a welder. He worked on high-rise construction, one of the best in the trade. He was working on a new corporate complex on the north side. The construction company had cut corners on safety equipment. The harnesses were worn out. The scaffolding platforms didn't meet code, but they kept pushing the crew to work faster." "Did he fall?" Sophia asked, in that direct way children ask the questions adults avoid. "Yes, sweetheart," Esperanza confirmed, pulling both older children close. "He fell from the 18th floor because a work platform collapsed. The company said the equipment had been inspected. When I tried to hold them accountable, when I asked for help to keep our family going, they told me it was his fault for not checking his own gear. They threatened to countersue if I kept pushing." Richard felt ice spread through his chest. This family had not simply lost their provider. They had been victimized by corporate negligence, and then blamed for it. "That's why we couldn't keep our apartment," Matthias said, quietly connecting the dots. "Exactly, baby," Esperanza said. "Without Daddy's income, we fell behind in 2 months. The landlord evicted us. We lost everything, the furniture, the photos of your father, even the Christmas gifts he had already bought for you kids." The picture forming in Richard's mind was crushing. This family had been living an ordinary American life, a working-class family with dignity and love and a father who showed up every day. All of it had been erased by one company's decision that safety equipment was too expensive. "But, Mama," Sophia said, holding her mother's hand, "you always say Daddy is watching over us from heaven. Do you think he's helping Diego right now?" "Of course he is, my love," Esperanza answered. "Daddy would never abandon us. He is in that room right now, telling those doctors exactly what to do." A young attending physician stepped into the waiting area, his face tired but composed. "Morales family?" he asked. Esperanza stood up so quickly she nearly fell. "That's me. I'm his mother. How is my son?" "Diego has responded well to the initial oxygen and bronchodilator treatment," the doctor said, with a tone that released the worst tension in the room. "His breathing has stabilized, and his oxygen levels are returning to a safer range." The relief that washed over Esperanza and her children was so physical, so visible, that Richard could feel it from across the room. "Does that mean he's going to be okay?" Sophia demanded, needing the direct answer. "It means we've gotten through the immediate crisis," the doctor said. "But Diego needs to be admitted. He has a severe respiratory infection, complicated by malnutrition and prolonged exposure to poor environmental conditions. He needs IV antibiotics and careful monitoring for at least a week." Silence. Richard watched the math happen behind Esperanza's eyes in real time. Hospitalization, a week minimum, medication, bills, lost work hours. He could see every calculation as clearly as if she had written it on the wall. "Doctor," she said carefully, "how much is this going to cost?" Right now, the priority is your son's health, the doctor said, deftly sidestepping the question. The billing office can discuss payment options afterward. But Esperanza had lived in poverty long enough to know that afterward meant a debt that would follow her for years. "Is there any way to manage some of this at home?" she asked. "I know how to care for sick children. I've been doing it for months." "Mrs. Morales," the doctor said gently but firmly, "your son requires equipment we only have here. If you attempt to treat him at home, there is a very real chance he does not survive. Are you willing to take that risk?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Richard stepped out of the shadows. "Excuse me, doctor," he said, moving toward the group with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being listened to. "My name is Richard Valmont. I will be covering all medical expenses for Diego Morales. Please see to it that he receives the best care available, without limitation." Esperanza spun to face him. The expression on her face was a collision of shock, confusion, terror, and something fragile she did not yet dare call hope. "Mr. Valmont," she breathed. "What? How? Why are you here?" Richard looked directly into her eyes. "Esperanza," he said, his voice barely steady, "I came here to ask for your forgiveness." The emergency room seemed to go still. Esperanza stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not know. "Forgiveness," she repeated. "Mr. Valmont, I don't understand what's happening. How did you know we were here? Why would you want to help Diego?" Richard took a breath that felt like the most honest one he had drawn in years. "Esperanza, I owe you a confession. For the past several weeks, I have been investigating you. I believed you were stealing cleaning supplies from the office. I hired a private investigator. I reviewed security footage, and tonight, I followed you." The color drained from Esperanza's face. Her worst nightmare was materializing right in front of her. She had been caught. But what devastated her most was not fear of the consequences. It was the shame of having her children hear that their mother had been labeled a thief. "My mom is not a thief," Matthias said, immediately stepping forward, his voice unwavering. "She is the best person I know. If she took anything, it was because we needed it to stay healthy." "I know that now, son," Richard said, addressing Matthias directly and with full respect. "And you're right. Your mother is not a thief. I was the one who failed to see what was right in front of me." "Are you going to send us to jail?" Sophia asked with the heartbreaking directness of a child who has learned that the world can be cruel to people like her family. Richard dropped down to one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. "No, sweetheart, nobody is going to jail. And nobody is going to hurt your family. Not now, not ever again." The doctor cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Diego needs to be moved to a room immediately. His oxygen saturation is dipping again." "Authorize everything," Richard said, standing. "Best available care, best available specialists. Cost is not a concern." "Mr. Valmont," Esperanza interrupted, finding her voice again, "I cannot accept this. I have no way to repay you, not on my salary, not in my lifetime." "Esperanza," Richard said, holding her gaze steadily, "after what I saw tonight, after understanding why you took those supplies, after seeing where you live and how you live and what you have been carrying alone, the one who should be paying is me. I should be paying for being blind, for being so consumed with my own world that I never once noticed the suffering happening inside my own building." "What exactly did you see?" she asked quietly. Richard looked down for a moment. "I followed you to your home. I saw where you live. I saw how you care for your children. I saw what you were doing with those products I thought you were stealing." The blood left Esperanza's face. The idea that her employer had witnessed the broken-down shell she was calling home, that he had seen the cracked ceilings, the cardboard windows, the mattresses on the floor, filled her with a humiliation so deep she felt physically ill. "You saw the abandoned house," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. "You saw how we're living. You saw there's no hot water, no heat. You saw my children sleeping on the floor. I saw an extraordinary mother doing the impossible to keep her children safe," Richard said, his voice firm and full. "I saw a woman using cleaning supplies not to sell or profit from, but to disinfect a home where she had no business living, because she was determined to protect her babies even there." "That is not extraordinary," Esperanza said, the grief breaking through again. "That failure. My children are living like this because of me. Diego is in this hospital because I could not give him a decent roof over his head." "Don't say that." Matthias grabbed his mother and held on with both arms. "You are the best mother in the world. Dad always said you were stronger than 100 men put together." "He was right," Sophia added, squeezing in beside her brother. "Mama, you give us love every single day. You make us feel safe. You teach us to be good people. That is everything." Richard stood back and watched this love pour from these children toward their mother, and understood with sudden clarity that he was witnessing something he had never experienced in his own life, despite every advantage he had ever been given. These children did not love their mother in spite of their poverty. They loved her because she had given every piece of herself to shield them from it. "Esperanza," he said quietly after a long moment, "do you know what affected me most out of everything I witnessed tonight?" She looked up. "It was when I heard Diego ask if his daddy was coming back from heaven." Richard's voice broke slightly. "And then when I heard you confessing to Matthias that you had taken those things from the office. You were not making excuses. You were telling your son it was wrong. You were in pain over it, and yet you were still doing it because you had no other way." "Because it is wrong," Esperanza said softly. "Taking things that don't belong to you is wrong, regardless of the reason." "You were not robbing me," Richard said with a conviction that startled even him. "You were borrowing disinfectant to sanitize a home where your children had to sleep. The wrong here was never yours." Esperanza's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. "It was still not mine to take," she said. "You're right," Richard admitted. "It wasn't. But it was mine, and if I had been a better employer, a better human being, I would have seen that one of my most dedicated employees was drowning. I would have noticed that you came in early and stayed late, not out of ambition, but out of desperation. I would have asked how you were doing and actually listened to the answer." The doctor reappeared at the edge of the waiting area. "Mr. Valmont, we need authorization confirmed in writing for the treatment plan." "I'm coming right now," Richard said. Then he turned back to Esperanza and the children. "We're going to talk more tonight, tomorrow, whenever you're ready. But first, let's make sure Diego gets everything he needs." As a gurney carried Diego toward the pediatric unit, Esperanza lowered herself back into the hard plastic chair. Her children folded around her like a shelter built from love. Richard watched, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt something more important than being the most powerful person in the room. He felt human. After several minutes of silence, Esperanza looked up at him. "Mr. Valmont, there is something you need to know, something about how we ended up in that house." Richard sat across from her and waited. "My husband, the children's father, his name was Fernando," she began, her voice taking on that soft, nostalgic quality that comes when we speak of people we loved and lost. "He was an industrial welder. He worked on high-rises, bridges. He was skilled, dependable, proud of his trade. He had dreams of giving his kids a better life than the one he had. "What happened to him?" Richard asked, though a heavy premonition was already gathering inside him. "He was part of the crew building the new mixed-use development on North Michigan Avenue," Esperanza said. "Platinum Tower." Richard's entire body went still. The construction company had decided to cut costs on safety gear. The harnesses were worn and cracked. The work platforms didn't meet OSHA code. But the project managers kept pushing the crew to accelerate the schedule. "He fell?" Richard asked, though the word barely came out. From the 18th floor, a platform collapsed beneath him. Esperanza's tears came steadily now, without drama. "When I tried to hold the company responsible, when I reached out to their legal team seeking any kind of support to keep my family together, they told me Fernando was at fault for not inspecting his own equipment. They threatened a countersuit if I continued to pursue it." Richard's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Which company was it?" "Valmont Construction," Esperanza said simply. "Your company, Mr. Valmont? Valmont Industries, the same one whose office I clean every night." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the silence that followed. Richard felt the floor shift under him. All this time, months of her working in his building, cleaning his desk, his conference rooms, his private office, knowing exactly who he was. Knowing that she swept the floors of the man whose decisions had taken her husband. "Did you know who I was when you applied for the job?" His voice was barely audible. "Of course I did," Esperanza said, with a calm so complete it was more devastating than rage. "I knew exactly who you were, the owner of the company that took my husband and then dismantled my life. I knew who signed off on every project. I knew your name before I ever set foot in your building." "Then why?" Richard asked, overwhelmed. "Why come to work for me? Why not confront me? Why not fight me?" Esperanza looked at her children before she answered. "Because I needed the work," she said simply. "Because my children needed to eat. Because seeking revenge was not going to bring Fernando back. And because Fernando always taught me that hatred only poisons the one who carries it." "But I am responsible for your husband's death," Richard said, the tears coming now unashamed. "My company, my cost-cutting decisions, my pressure on project managers to deliver ahead of schedule." "Yes," Esperanza said quietly, "you are. But hating you was not going to feed my children. Working for you was." In that moment, Richard Valmont understood with total clarity that he had been in the presence of a greatness of spirit that no amount of money or influence could manufacture or purchase. This woman had found the strength to show up to his building every single night, to clean around him, to maintain her professionalism and dignity while sweeping the floors of the man whose choices had destroyed her family. "Esperanza," he said finally, and the words came slowly because nothing felt adequate. "There are no words for how deeply sorry I am. There is no way to give back what my negligence took from your family. But I give you my word, for whatever it is worth coming from me, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." "What does that mean exactly?" Matthias asked, watching Richard with the careful measuring eyes of a boy who had learned not to trust promises made by people who had already hurt his family. Richard looked at the 12-year-old who had grown up far too fast and made the most significant professional decision of his life. "It means your family will never struggle for the basics again," he said with a steadiness he felt in his bones. "It means you will have a real home, full educational support for all three of you, medical coverage guaranteed, everything your father wanted to give you when he was working on my projects." "Why should we trust you?" Sophia asked directly. You already hurt us once. Richard knelt again to meet her eyes. Because your family taught me tonight what it actually means to be a human being, he said. And because I am never again going to let my ignorance cause this kind of suffering to anyone. The next several hours in that waiting room unfolded like a long, slow tide. Richard had canceled 2 early morning meetings from his phone. He had ignored 4 calls from his CFO. He was completely, entirely present in a place he had never expected to be. Fully absorbed in a reality he had spent decades carefully insulating himself against. Every 30 minutes, a nurse came out with updates on Diego. The little boy had been connected to monitors, IV lines, a pulse oximeter. The doctors explained that weeks of living in deteriorating conditions had severely weakened his immune system. The infection had progressed further than initially visible. Is my brother going to die? Sophia asked after the 3rd medical update with that raw, childlike precision that goes straight to the terror everyone else is dancing around. No, sweetheart, Esperanza answered, though Richard could hear the uncertainty trembling just behind her certainty. Diego is strong, just like his daddy. He is going to come through this. Mr. Valmont, Matthias said after a long stretch of silence. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you have kids? The question landed like a stone in still water. Yes, he had 2 children. Teenagers who lived in a 4-bedroom house on the North Shore, attended one of the best private schools in Chicago, had every material thing imaginable, and knew their father primarily as the person who funded that life. Yes, he said quietly, I have 2. Sebastian is 16. Valeria is 14. Do they know where you are right now? Matthias pressed. No, Richard admitted. They probably think I'm at a late meeting or traveling for work. That's usually where I am. Usually, Sophia repeated, turning the word over as if it were strange. She could not comprehend how someone could have a living, breathing father and choose to be somewhere else. My children are used to me not being home, Richard said, hearing how hollow it sounded as he said it out loud. I've always told myself that my job was to provide, to give them the best schools, the nicest house, vacations in Europe, summer camps. But do you hug them? Sophia asked. Richard blinked. Do I hug them? Yes, she said, as if it were the most obvious question in the world. We hug Mama every day, lots of times, especially when she looks sad or worried. Do you hug Sebastian and Valeria when they're sad? Richard sat with that question for a long moment. He could not remember the last time he had hugged either of his children. Their interactions consisted of questions about grades, transfers to their spending accounts, and stiff conversations during the rare family dinners he managed to attend. I don't think I hugged them enough, he said finally. Daddy hugged us every single day, Matthias said, a soft, tired smile lighting his face for just a moment. The second he walked through the door after work, before he did anything else, he said the first thing he needed after a long day was to feel his kids. And on weekends, Sophia added, Daddy used to turn our apartment into a castle or a spaceship or a jungle. He didn't need expensive toys because he made everything an adventure. Richard listened and understood completely and without escape that Fernando Morales, a welder who worked with his hands and died because a harness was not replaced in time, had been infinitely richer than Richard in every way that actually endures. Fernando had had the full, undivided love of his family. He had built memories that still lit up his children's faces even through grief. He had been the living center of his home. Do you know what we miss most? Esperanza said softly, joining the conversation. What? Richard asked. The stories, she said with a smile that held both joy and aching in equal measure. Every single night, Fernando made up a different story for the kids. Stories where they were the heroes, where they overcame impossible things, where they learned something about being a good person. He invented them? Richard asked. Completely, Matthias confirmed. Dad said the best stories come from the heart, not a book. He gave Diego superpowers. Sophia was a princess who saved entire kingdoms. I was an explorer who discovered new worlds. And at the end of every story, Sophia's eyes lit up. Daddy always told us that in real life we were even more special than in the story, because we were actually his. Richard felt the tears come again. This family had lost a father who did not just love his children, but actively, creatively, daily invested in their sense of worth. He had given them the greatest gift a parent can give, the unshakable feeling of being known and treasured. Have your kids ever asked you to tell them a story? Esperanza asked. No, Richard said. They've always had every screen and device imaginable in their rooms. It never occurred to me they might want something as simple as that. Maybe, Matthias said gently. They don't know they can ask. Maybe they're waiting for you to offer. At that precise moment, the attending physician reappeared. Morales family, he said, consulting his chart. Esperanza shot to her feet. Diego has responded very well to the antibiotic treatment, the doctor said with a smile that arrived like sunlight after a long storm. His breathing has stabilized significantly, and his blood oxygen levels are returning to normal parameters. The relief that crashed through that family was something Richard felt in his whole body. Esperanza covered her face and wept. Matthias and Sophia collapsed into each other, laughing and crying at once. Is he really okay? Sophia demanded, needing to hear it one more time. We've cleared the immediate danger, the doctor said. But Diego will need to stay admitted for at least one more week to make sure the infection is fully resolved. And after discharge, he'll need specific home conditions to prevent relapse. What kind of conditions? Esperanza asked. Diego needs to live in an environment completely free of mold, dampness, and air contamination, the doctor said. His lungs have taken significant damage from prolonged exposure to poor air quality. A relapse could be very serious. He needs a home with proper heating, working ventilation, ideally air purifiers in the bedroom. The silence that followed did not need translation. Everyone in that waiting room understood that the abandoned house on the south side of Chicago was precisely the opposite of everything the doctor had just described. Doctor, Richard said, stepping forward, what would the ideal environment for Diego's recovery look like? A home with central heating and air, no moisture issues, good insulation, proper ventilation, and ideally no construction materials in deteriorating condition. Somewhere clean, stable, and dry. Understood, Richard said. That will not be a problem. Mr. Valmont? Esperanza interrupted, her voice back. I cannot let you do more than you already have. The hospital, the medication, that is already too much. Esperanza, he said, holding her gaze. Diego is in this hospital because my negligence took his father and forced his family into a house that slowly made him sick. This is not charity. This is accountability. Long overdue. But a home like what the doctor described, she started. Why can't he help? Sophia cut in with that simple, devastating child logic. He has money. We need a safe house for Diego to breathe. Why is that complicated? Esperanza looked at her daughter. Because when someone gives you something very big, sweetheart, sometimes they expect something in return that you might not be able to give. Richard felt that land like a slap. She was right. In his world, every favor had a price. Every act of generosity was an investment in disguise. Esperanza, he said quietly. All I want in return is the chance to be a better man than I have been, and the chance to honor Fernando's memory by making sure his children have what he was working to give them. Matthias studied Richard's face for a long moment, with the particular focus of children who have become experts at detecting whether adults mean what they say. For real, he said. For real, Richard confirmed. Then I want to ask you a favor, said Richard. I want you to teach me how to be the kind of father Fernando was. I want to learn how to tell stories to my own children, how to hold them when they are hurting, how to make them feel like the most important thing in the room. Esperanza stared at him. Of all the things she had imagined this night might bring, this was not anywhere among them. I mean it, Richard said. You have all lost the best father in the world. But his memory, the way he loved your family, that can teach me how to love mine better. And that would be the most meaningful payment you could ever give me. For the first time in this long and brutal night, Esperanza smiled with something that might be called hope. I think, she said at last, Fernando would be very glad to know that his legacy is helping another family find other. 3 days after the promises made in that hospital waiting room, Richard Valmont stood in front of a 2-story craftsman-style house in the Bridgeport neighborhood of Chicago. He had the keys in one hand and the title deed in the other. This had not been an impulse. He had spent 72 hours carefully researching every detail to find the right home for the Morales family. The house met every condition the doctor had specified for Diego's recovery. Central heating and air conditioning, fresh insulation, air purifiers in every bedroom. And it had been built just 2 years earlier with materials completely free of mold or deterioration. But Richard had gone well beyond medical requirements. 4 spacious bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a modern kitchen with new appliances, a deep backyard where the children could safely run and play, and the house sat in the catchment area for 2 of the best public schools in the city. It was exactly the kind of home Fernando Morales had been working toward when he climbed those scaffolding platforms every morning. Are you certain about this, Mr. Valmont? Asked his real estate attorney, Maria, reviewing the rushed paperwork. This is a significant asset transfer by any measure. Completely certain, Richard said. And it isn't generosity, it is justice. Very, very late. While he waited for the family to arrive, Richard reflected on the 3 extraordinary days that had reshaped him from the inside out. He had sat down with Sebastian and Valeria the evening after the hospital. He had come home before 8 for the first time in months. When he walked into the dining room and found his 2 teenagers eating alone again, as they always did, something in him broke open. Dad! Valeria had looked up, visibly thrown. Is everything okay at work? We didn't expect you until the weekend. Those words. His own children were surprised to see him on a weekday. His presence was an unexpected interruption to their normal routine. I need to tell you both something important, he had said, sitting down with them at the table, and I need to ask your forgiveness for the kind of father I've been. For 2 hours he told them everything. Esperanza, the abandoned house, the hospital, Diego, the death of Fernando Morales on a Valmont Industries worksite, and the lesson delivered by a family who had every reason to hate him about what a father is actually supposed to be. Sebastian had listened carefully before he spoke. Dad, we've always known you love us. We've never felt like you didn't. But, Valeria added honestly, we have sometimes felt like you don't really know us. Like you know we exist, but you don't know who we actually are. Those words dismantled him more completely than any board meeting ever had. His children were not accusing him of abandonment. They were telling him that he had missed the chance to actually know the people they were becoming. "What can we do to change that?" he had asked, and he meant it. "You could start by asking us how our day was," Valeria said. "Not just about grades or schedules. Actually ask." "And maybe," Sebastian added, "you could tell us stories about when you were a kid. We don't know anything about that. What it was like, what you were afraid of, how you met Mom." "Any of it," Richard promised, and he had started that same night. Now, standing in front of this house in the afternoon sunlight, he felt a kind of nervous excitement he had not felt since he was a young man building his first company from nothing. Except this time, the measure of success had nothing to do with revenue. The cab pulled up at 2 in the afternoon, exactly as planned. Diego had been discharged that morning. He was still fragile-looking, but the color in his cheeks was returning. He was 3-year-old Rosie again. Esperanza stepped out first. Then Matias, who helped Diego down from the running board with the gentleness of someone who had been a caretaker far longer than a big brother should be. And Sophia, who immediately bolted toward the front yard. "Mama, look at the flowers," she called out, pointing at the rose bushes along the front walk. "And there's a swing on that tree." "Sophia, don't touch anything yet," Esperanza said automatically, with the reflex caution of a woman who had learned not to expect too much. "We're here to see it. That doesn't mean—" "Esperanza," Richard said gently, walking toward her with the keys extended. "This is your home. It belongs to you, completely." The silence that followed was full of the kind of weight that words cannot carry. Esperanza looked at the keys as though they might vanish if she reached for them too quickly. "What do you mean, completely ours?" Matthias asked, standing close to his mother, protective as always. "I mean the house is paid in full," Richard said, kneeling so he was at eye level of all 3 children at once. "It is titled in your mother's name. No one can ever take it from you." "Is it ours forever?" Diego asked in that small voice that still carried a slight rasp from the infection. "Like for real forever?" "For real forever," Richard confirmed, and the tears came before he could stop them at the sight of this little boy's face opening with wonder. Esperanza reached out and took the keys with trembling hands. For months in that abandoned house, she had lain awake, imagining this kind of moment. She had told herself it was foolish, dangerous dreaming, and she had gone on dreaming it anyway. "Can we go inside?" Sophia asked, practically levitating with anticipation. "It's your home," Richard said. "You can do anything you want." When Esperanza opened the front door, what the family found inside exceeded every version of the dream. Richard had not just purchased the house. He had furnished it completely with everything a family of 3 children needed to feel at home. In the living room, a comfortable sectional sofa, a solid wood coffee table, a widescreen television mounted on the wall, and in the corner a full bookcase stocked with books from picture books to middle-grade adventures to young adult novels. The kitchen was outfitted with brand-new appliances, full sets of cookware and dishware, and the pantry was stocked with enough groceries for several weeks. "Mama, there's a staircase," Matthias shouted, taking the steps 2 at a time like an actual 12-year-old boy for the first time in months. "And every room has its own bed," Sophia called down. Richard had thought carefully about each bedroom. The master had a queen bed with fresh linens and an ample closet. Matthias had a study desk and educational wall maps. Sophia's room was painted in soft lavender with a twin bed and a shelf of new dolls waiting for her. And Diego's room had a toddler bed with side rails, a medical-grade humidifier already plugged in and running, and a mobile of glow-in-the-dark stars above it. "Mr. Valmont," Esperanza said from the doorway of her room, her voice barely holding, "This is more than I have ever dreamed of giving my children. I don't know how we could ever—" "Esperanza," Richard said, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. "Do you remember what you told me in the hospital about why you chose to work for me instead of fighting me?" Because revenge was not going to feed my children, she said. Exactly. And this home is not revenge either. It is my attempt to honor the man your husband was. To make sure his children have the chances he was working toward when he was on my job sites. Mama, come see my room, Diego called from down the hall, his voice brighter, fuller than it had been in weeks. When they gathered in the hallway, the children drew Esperanza room to room, showing her every discovery with the particular joy of children who have never taken comfort for granted. Sophia held a new doll. Matthias ran his fingers along the spine of a science encyclopedia. Diego pressed his face against the window to look at the backyard. Mr. Valmont, Matthias said, returning to the hallway where Richard stood. Can I ask you something? Always. Do your kids know what you're doing for us? Yes, Richard said. I told them everything, and they know that your family has taught me things that no business school ever could. What kind of things? Sophia asked. That hugging my kids matters more than buying them things, Richard said. That telling stories before bed is worth more than any vacation. That knowing my children's dreams is more important than adding to my bank account. Are you going to start hugging them more? Diego asked with absolute earnestness. I already started, Richard said, and his smile was real. Last night I hugged Sebastian and Valeria for the first time in too long. And you know what I found out? What? That they needed those hugs just as much as I did. They just hadn't known how to ask. Esperanza appeared from the master bedroom, tears falling freely now, and she did not try to stop them. Fernando would be so proud to know his story is helping another family find their way back to each other. I believe that completely, Richard said. And I want to tell you one more thing. There is a condition on this house. The old fear flickered through Esperanza's eyes instantly. One condition, Richard said, holding her gaze. That you allow me to overhaul every single safety protocol at Valmont Industries. That you help me build the kind of standards that make sure no other worker dies the way Fernando did. Help me turn his tragedy into protection for every laborer who climbs a scaffold in one of my buildings. Esperanza was very still for a long moment. You want to name it after him, she said at last. It was not a question. I want Fernando Morales to become the name synonymous with the safest construction standards in the industry. His name on every hard hat, every inspection report, every harness that goes on every worker's body. For the first time since the night her world collapsed, Esperanza felt that what had happened to Fernando might become something more than a wound. Yes, she said, I accept that with everything I have. The first dinner between the Valmont and Morales families happened 1 week after the keys were handed over. Richard arrived at 6 with Sebastian and Valeria carrying flowers for Esperanza and books for the children. His teenagers had been quietly nervous all afternoon, unsure what to expect from people whose lives were so different from their own. The house that had been empty just days before now hummed with life. The smell of home-cooked food drifted from the kitchen. The sound of children's laughter rolled down the stairs. Everywhere you looked there was warmth, the kind that does not come from a thermostat. Diego had improved remarkably. His cheeks were round and pink, and he ran to the door on his own 2 feet when the bell rang. They're here, he announced to the whole house, as if it were Christmas morning. Esperanza opened the door in a simple blue dress, her posture carrying a dignity that had returned, along with the safety of a real home. Welcome, she said warmly, and drew them all inside. The first minutes were gently awkward. Sebastian and Valeria, raised in a household where staff prepared every meal, found themselves in a kitchen where everyone was expected to participate. Matthias handed Sebastian a stack of dinner plates and said naturally, without a trace of condescension, In our family, everyone helps set the table. Sebastian looked down at the plates and then up at Matthias, and something shifted in him. He set the table. Valeria stood near Sofia, watching with quiet fascination as the younger girl helped Diego wash his hands, checked that the serving spoons were in all the right bowls, and moved through the kitchen with a competence and purpose that Valeria had never needed to develop. The meal itself was simple and real. Slow-cooked chicken, rice and beans, a fresh salad from the small herb garden already starting in the backyard planter, warm corn tortillas Esperanza had made by hand. No chef, no service, just food made by a family with care. In our family, Esperanza said as she set the last bowl down, we have a tradition at dinner. Every person shares one good thing from their day and one thing they feel grateful for. Valeria blinked. One good thing and one grateful thing, she repeated slowly, as if the practice were in a language she was hearing for the first time. Diego always goes first, Sofia announced, because he's the littlest. Something good today, Diego said, sitting up very straight. I ran all the way around the backyard, and I did not get tired, and I am grateful because my chest does not hurt when I breathe anymore. Sebastian and Valeria went very quiet. This 5-year-old had just named breathing without pain as the best part of his day. Their own daily irritations, the slow Wi-Fi, the canceled plans, the difficult homework, suddenly felt very small and very distant. Sofia went next. Something good was finding a monarch butterfly in the garden, and it stayed on my finger for a really long time. I am grateful for my own room, where I can keep all my special things. Matthias. Something good was finishing my math homework without any help and understanding all of it. I am grateful for a desk I can actually study at without any noise to distract me. Esperanza. Something good was watching Diego play outside this afternoon. I am grateful because my children have a safe home where they can grow and dream. Then all eyes turned to Richard, Sebastian, and Valeria. None of them had ever done this before. None of them had a practiced answer. I've never done this, Richard admitted honestly, but I won't try. Something good that happened today was watching Diego run to the door to let us in. And I am grateful because this family is teaching me how to be a better father. Sebastian took his turn, slowly chewing over his words like he was tasting something new. Something good was meeting Matthias and realizing there are people my age who are a lot more mature and a lot more aware of what actually matters than I am. And I am grateful because Dad is starting to actually be around. Valeria was last. Something good was watching Sofia take care of Diego. It made me think about what kind of big sister I want to be. And I am grateful because this family is showing me what it really looks like to love each other. The table was very quiet after that, but it was the kind of quiet that is full, not empty. Okay, Matthias announced, with the authority of the family storyteller. Now it is time for the stories. For the next hour, the Morales children shared the stories Fernando used to tell them. But they did not just perform them. They invited Sebastian and Valeria inside. Sofia told a story where Valeria was a scientist princess who saved kingdoms through chemistry. Matthias built an adventure where Sebastian was an explorer who mapped civilizations no one had ever found. And Diego, with help from both his siblings, told a tale where everyone at the table was a superhero whose greatest power was looking out for each other. Richard watched his teenagers be drawn in. He watched them laugh with their whole faces in a way he had not seen in years. He watched them stop performing and start playing right there at the dinner table of a family they had met less than 2 weeks ago. "Dad?" Valeria said softly as they drove home much later, the city lights sliding past the windows. "Can we do that at our house? The gratitude dinner, the stories." "Yes," Richard said, "starting this week. And maybe," Sebastian added, We could actually cook together sometime. Like actually make the food ourselves? I'd like that very much, Richard said, and he meant it in a way he had never meant anything so simple before. 3 weeks after the keys were handed over, Richard sat in his office, but the clock on the wall read 4:30, and he was actually planning to be home for dinner. That was new. He had made himself a personal rule: no work after 5 on Fridays. Weekends belonged to his family. The rule was simple. Keeping it was the hardest thing he had done in years, and it was also the best. Esperanza had taken on a new role at Valmont Industries, not cleaning, consulting. She now led the implementation team for the Fernando Morales Workplace Safety Program, the most comprehensive labor protection framework the company had ever built. She walked into Richard's office that afternoon with a report folder and the quiet, purposeful energy of someone who understood exactly what was at stake in every decision they made. Mr. Valmont, here's the final rollout summary for the Fernando Morales protocols. Richard leaned forward. 0 workplace accidents across all active Valmont construction sites for the past 3 weeks, she said, and let the numbers speak for itself. Workers are reporting they feel safer and more valued than at any other company they have worked for. And the feedback from foremen is that the daily safety checks are actually improving efficiency because issues are caught early instead of midway through a project. And the cost impact? Richard asked. The initial investment in equipment upgrades and training was significant, Esperanza said. But the reduction in insurance premiums, legal exposure, and lost productivity from injuries is already offsetting the outlay, and our reputation in the trade market has shifted. We are attracting more experienced crews and being considered for contracts that previously went elsewhere. Richard nodded. He remembered a time when he believed that safety was a cost center, an expense you minimized when margins were tight. It had taken the death of Fernando Morales and the near death of a 5-year-old child to teach him that the opposite was true. Safety was an investment in people, in families, in futures. Esperanza, he said, closing the folder. I want to propose something else. She waited. A scholarship fund, named for Fernando. For children of construction workers who want to study engineering, architecture, urban planning, materials science, any field that connects to making the industry safer and more just. She was very still. And I want you to run it, Richard continued, to decide who receives the support, who gets the chance to turn a tragedy into a solution. Who better than you to recognize the young people who are ready to carry that work forward? Esperanza was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady and full. Fernando always believed that the only way tragedy makes sense is if you convert it into something that makes the world better. You just described exactly that. Then you'll do it? Yes, she said. With everything I have, and in his name. That same evening, both families gathered again at the Morales house for dinner. By now, the ritual had settled into something that felt natural and necessary for everyone at the table. After the meal, after the gratitude circle, after the stories, Esperanza lit a candle in the center of the table. It had become their quiet way of including Fernando. Daddy? Sophia said, addressing the flame with the absolute certainty of a child who has never doubted love survives death. Tonight, Mr. Richard told us about the scholarships that are going to help other kids study so that buildings are safer for the workers inside them. Are you proud of us? The candle flame bent suddenly to one side, though the windows were closed and the air was still. And then it straightened and burned bright and clear. Daddy is here, Diego said with complete conviction. He's saying yes. Richard looked around the table at Esperanza, who had walked through fire and come out carrying her children on her back, at Matthias, who had shouldered adult weight without losing his soul, at Sophia, who turned hardship into poetry, at Diego, who found joy in breathing, at Sebastian and Valeria, who were learning for the first time to look up from the comfort they had always been handed and see the world as it actually was. Do you know what I think is the most remarkable thing about all of this? Richard said. What? 3 children asked at once. Fernando Morales is not going to be just a name on a headstone, Richard said. He is going to be a name on scholarship certificates that change young people's lives. He is going to be a name on safety protocols that send workers home to their families every night. He is going to be a name that workers remember when they put on a harness that fits right and holds. His name is going to keep doing good long after all of us are gone. Because love does not end, Matthias said quietly. Exactly right, Richard agreed. It just changes shape, Sophia added. It becomes something new. And in that house, with that candle burning steadily at the center of the table, in the middle of a city where millions of lives brushed past each other every day without ever truly touching, 2 families had become something the world always needs more of and rarely finds. Proof that redemption is possible. That honesty, even when it is painful, opens doors that pride keeps locked. That the children of people we have wronged carry within them the most powerful teachers we will ever find. And that love, when it is real and when it refuses to quit, finds a way to transform even the worst losses into something that outlasts grief. Fernando Morales had dreamed of giving his family a safe home, a garden, a future. He never got to see it. But every time a worker came home safe, every time a young person opened a scholarship letter, every time his children sat at a table full of warmth and laughter and the smell of something good cooking, Fernando Morales was there. Because love that real does not die. It just keeps finding new ways to make the world a little bit better.